All right, guys, what you're about to see is a podcast episode between myself, an attorney, and a handwriting analyst named Nanette Barto, who's worked on the Zodiac case. She actually has a YouTube channel where you can go over there and catch up what she's been working on with the Zodiac. I've been following her for at least 13 years. I will be dropping her links, so make sure you go check her out. So, what this podcast episode is about is an innocent man who's been locked up for over 30 years, and Ms. Barto has been hired to look over some of the handwriting from that case. And what she discovers makes her want to look at all the other evidence as well. Ms. Barto has found new evidence, hence, Mr. Wilson can file a habeas corpus, meaning he can possibly get a new trial because of the new evidence. The reason for this podcast is to see if we can get an innocent man out of prison. A quick rundown of the story: a young man rents a room from a woman, and there's another man, William Coleman, who also rents a room from that woman. Mr. Wilson arrives home to find the woman dead in the house. The cops are called. Mr. Wilson is arrested for murder, and Mr. William Coleman disappears, never to be heard from again. Mr. Wilson is convicted, and he spent 30 years trying to exonerate himself. We believe there is new evidence, and if something ever happens to me, I want Nanette Barto on the case. This is truly an unbelievable podcast episode, folks. Let's see if we can all work together to get this man out of prison. So, without further ado, here's the full interview. Mr. Nolan Del Campo, you want to tell us who you are and why we're here today?
Well,
No
I'm
worries for
an
me.
attorney, and I'm here at the request of Nanette to see if I can contribute any legal knowledge or any historical knowledge to the podcast.
Cool. And many of you guys have met Nanette Barto before. I've interviewed her and we've talked to her. She's a handwriting analyst and she's worked on the Zodiac case. And I do believe that her work is outstanding. I've actually been following her for a long time. We will include her link for you guys so you guys can go subscribe to her channel. But Nanette, you put this presentation together? Am I right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Do you want to tell us what this is, what we're looking at?
Yes, this is actually a live case that I've taken as a handwriting expert. I was contacted by Mr. Peter Wilson, who is currently incarcerated and has been since 1996 for a murder he claims to be innocent of. He asked me to look at some entries for removal of blood evidence from the police lockup and to determine whether or not that handwriting and removal of that blood evidence was done by the arresting officer. And in doing so, he then, laid out more evidence, which really kind of shows that there is a good possibility that he was absolutely framed for this murder. Evidence has been withheld. Evidence has been planted, and of course, his alibi had been removed and taken out of his case file. Subsequently, after 30 years and obtaining more documentation on his case, he was finally given these pages, which would have supported his alibi and likely would have caused him to be found innocent in this particular crime.
So, with all this evidence that is being put together, is it possible that Mr. Wilson can get another trial or possibly released because of this evidence?
That is what he's requesting at this point in time. He has put forth a writ of habeas corpus to the Santa Clara court system, and probably no one could elaborate a little bit more on what that is.
It's a last ditch effort after all your appeals are exhausted to try and seek your freedom, basically. The habeas corpus being the body. And it's an old school term from back in the day. Problem is with habeas corpus now, it's governed by federal law. I think you first do a state one, and then your last ditch effort is a federal habeas. But they've changed the laws on it, so there's a deadline that I think would be long past. But the way around the deadline is if there's new evidence, and it seems like
Correct.
what it's saying is that there's newly discovered evidence, which would give him a loophole to maybe to actually have the authority to file the habeas.
And
But
what is the new evidence?
So basically, the new evidence that he has discovered is, again, we have alibi information, which are receipts, statements, things that were written during the time the DA claims the murder occurred. So the DA has given a time frame of approximately an hour and 10 minutes from 12:48 p.m. on Saturday the 30th to 1:58 p.m., in which time the murder was purportedly taking place. He had alibi evidence that was removed from the police file. So that evidence has now come to light, and we do have pages that indicate that it was taken out by somebody, which we'll see in this. He also had sent the DNA analysis of both the crime scene and his actual DNA that was taken by the police department to an independent lab, and that independent lab found that the electropherograms, or basically the degradation of the DNA, was identical, and that was impossible for that to be identical between blood that was taken from his arm versus blood that was at a crime scene. So that is new evidence. And then also discovering these pages that listed his alibi and having that removed basically from the police file meant that it was not seen in court or talked about.
Also, there was another gentleman may have been
Culpability?
involved. What was it? William
Right.
Coleman?
Yes. So William Coleman was the second roommate. So Mr. Peter Wilson was a roommate of Hawkjuk Kim, and William Coleman was also a resident in that house. While Peter Wilson was gone that particular day because he took a taxi ride into San Francisco at approximately 2 p.m., he returned home and discovered Hawkjuk Kim at approximately 3:53 or 3:58 in the morning. He approached Mr. Coleman and had indicated that something was wrong with her. She needed help, asked him to call the police, and he basically kind of him-hawed around and was not even remotely interested in going and taking a look. I mean, I'm sorry, somebody's dead in my house. I probably want to see this. But he was very nonchalant, as Mr. Wilson describes it, and it took him a minute to even get on the phone and call the police department, which he evidently did. And at some point in time before the preliminary hearing of Mr. Wilson, Mr. Coleman actually absconded to another country. So there was, a red flag there. And even the DA stipulated to the fact that they could not locate this individual, but they were going to proceed with this trial against my client, Mr. Wilson. Unfortunately, they did not look at anybody else. They basically, from the moment they walked through the door, decided it was going to be Mr. Wilson, and they subsequently planned their entire case around that.
Okay, can we back up a second? So a woman died in the residence of these two people.
It was her house, and they're her renters. Yes.
Oh, okay. So they were renting from her, rooms from her.
Correct.
And what town was this?
Palo Alto.
Palo Alto. Okay, so Santa Clara County, or which county is that?
I'm not sure of the county.
Okay.
Santa Clara County Superior Court is where Mr. Wilson was convicted.
Okay. So Santa Clara County. Okay. It's a big county.
Yeah, it is.
Right. There was also sperm, an intact motile sperm, found on the victim's body. And she was an older Asian lady who had been divorced for several years. Her family had indicated she was not a likely person to date or to have casual sex. Some of the evidence that they found was she was found at the bottom of the basement with no shirt on, one shoe off to the right, her robe laying next to her. And when they had done the autopsy and taken her pants down, they found leaves that were located in the basement that were stuck to her bottom. So clearly somebody had pulled her pants down in order for that leaf to have become stuck to her bottom, and then pulled her pants back up. And then they literally did everything they could to try and show that this was not a rape. So the DA had not tested the actual sperm, which probably would have exculped my client, but also tried to indicate that she was sexually active and that she could have had sex up to 3 days previous to her murder, which subsequent evidence coming out shows that motile sperm only stays motile for approximately 12 hours before the tails begin to fall off and it's no longer mobile. So that doesn't fit in with the time frame of the DA's, the time frame in which they claim that she was murdered, because the autopsy was not done until the following Monday. Mind you, they claim she was killed on Saturday, but Monday morning is when they're finding this motile sperm, which means it literally had to have happened within the last pretty much 12 to 24 hours. They did have technicians and pathologists testify on their behalf, and they had testified that that the sperm could be motile for 72 hours. They testified to rigor mortis lasting much longer than it actually does. And then in subsequent testimony, he was actually able to find other cases these individuals testified in where they basically are refuting the very testimony they gave in his case by claiming that it would not be motile after 12 hours and that rigor mortis was set at this particular time frame. So they're basically confirming, or I'm sorry, again, refuting basically what they testified against him in.
Okay, were both the roommates there when the cops arrived?
Yes.
Okay, so
And of
why did
course,
they put on Wilson and not the other guy? Or shouldn't they be open-minded and look at both of them?
absolutely. And Mr. Coleman was being investigated, obviously, up until the point that he left the country. So he was part of it, but Mr. Wilson had actually gone down the stairs and attempted to assess Miss Kim to determine whether or not she had actually expired. And in doing so, obviously, would have, gotten any of his DNA on her at that point in time and possibly any blood that she might have had because she was bludgeoned to death.
That may have been one of the reasons why the other guy wouldn't go investigate, because he didn't want to leave more evidence.
Correct. And if we were to walk down, let's say, let me see if I can.
I hate to ask this question, but do you believe that it's possible that she was actually raped?
Oh, absolutely. They
Right.
found semen. They found motile sperm. Again, the whole family had indicated that she is not somebody who just casually dates. She hadn't been seeing anybody. They would have known. They had really close contact with her. So basically, the outline on this starts off with Saturday, March 30th in 1996. In Palo Alto. She's 59 years of age. She's a single woman of Asian descent. She had been divorced for 20 years and not known to be dating anyone by friends and family. She had last spoken to, or she had the last phone call made out of her house was approximately 12:44 to 12:48 p.m. She had called her niece, and her niece was not home. Her niece then attempted 2 phone calls before 1:12 p.m., got a busy signal, so likely she was on another phone call previous to leaving. And then after the 2 phone calls, she basically was just going straight to voicemail. Found bludgeoned to death in her basement, partially nude, with a 4x12 basically laid across her shoulders. We already talked about the robe and the pants, the leaf. So so they did not find a murder weapon in the sink. And basically, Mr. Wilson's story is that when he had come home before catching his cab to San Francisco, he saw that a vehicle was parked in the driveway and it had a cover over it, and Miss Kim's vehicle was actually gone. When he got back at 3 a.m., her car was now in the driveway, and the vehicle that was there when he had left with the taxi cab was gone. Let's see.
So, what were the ages of the 2 redders, Wilson and Clayton?
Good question.
I am not sure. It seems to me that he was going to college at the time, so he was probably 18 to 22, somewhere around there. Very young. I don't have any information on Mr. Coleman as far as his age, but it sounds to me like she just rented out maybe to college students or, things like that to make ends meet.
Was he at Stanford?
Yes. And so basically, the DA claims the murder occurred between 12:48 p.m. and 1:58 p.m., and that Mr. Wilson had taken the phone off the hook while he committed the crime, which is why the phone was busy when the niece attempted to call. The suspect they also claimed that Mr. Wilson had sat her down before murdering her and made her write 3 rental receipts. This just sounds ridiculous to me. Let me get you to write me a rental receipt that I paid my rent right before I kill you. But this is what the DA has laid out. So basically, inside of this hour and 10 minutes, he sat her down, made her write out 3 rental receipts, proceeded to kill her and bludgeon her in the basement. She had multiple contusions and lacerations to the head and face. That he then laid this 4x12 beam onto her body, and then the suspect had time to clean up and take Kim's shirt because it purportedly had blood on it, or she wasn't wearing one. That's what the DA argued. DA also argued that Miss Kim had not been raped. It was consensual sex with an unknown lover in an earlier time, up to 3 days prior. The medical examiner, Parviz Pakdaman, testifies that no visual sign of torn or damaged tissue to the vaginal region indicated no rape occurred, but later testimony, he testified in other cases more recently that just because there isn't visible damage doesn't mean that they weren't raped. So we've got a conflict of testimony there. The crime lab technician, Nancy Marte, found 1 intact sperm, but she testifies that sperm can maintain motility for up to 72 hours, so it was possible that the victim had consensual sex as early as 3 days before being killed, and this was never tested for DNA. That's the most disappointing part, because the DA did not want to go in at a rape murder type scenario. They just basically wanted to kick that and make it sound as implausible as possible. The lab technologist Milt Smith testifies in trial that he drew 2 vials of blood, but 2 officers after that, including the arresting officer, testified that there was only 1 vial. So I don't understand how the jury would come to a conclusion if a lab tech says, I pull 2 vials, period. I pull 1 for DNA typing and I pull 1 for any type of outside influences, such as drugs, alcohol, or otherwise. He says he pulls 2 vials, but then we have 2 other officers that are stating there was only ever 1 vial pulled. And that's where I came into play. Says pages 9. Okay, so pages 9, which is an alibi for Rogers Restaurant that Mr. Wilson was at 1:30, which would have been mid-crime spree, was removed from his file. Well, it was taken from his backpack, copied, put into the file, and then subsequently removed. Now, if I could get more handwriting from the individuals that were involved during this time, we might be able to identify who was the person responsible for removing that file, and I can show those particular papers here shortly. And then the 126, which is another page, which was a Caltrans receipt, which is in the alibi, showing that he purchased this particular ticket to come home at 11, I want to say it was 11:30 p.m. That was also removed from the police file and not provided to the defense during both trials. So basically, once the backpack had been searched, the items had been taken out, it was determined that these could provide him with an alibi. They then subsequently removed them from the police file altogether. And that's just scary. So Detective Michael York contacts the coroner at 6:56 p.m. on the 31st, which is the following Sunday, and tells him to show up in about 40 to 55 minutes. When he gets there, he has to wait an additional 20 to 25 minutes to go down to the basement because the forensic team was not yet finished when he arrived. And this is from direct testimony from the actual coroner. Coroner's statement that the body was in full rigor mortis at approximately 8:30 based on his testimony, and rigor mortis was gone by 9:30 a.m. the following Monday morning. And rigor mortis typically will last approximately 24 hours as far as I can tell. So 8 to 12 hours till they make it to full rigidity. And if she was in full rigor at 8 p.m. at night, then that meant that her murder had happened sometime in the early morning hours of Sunday. My client, Mr. Wilson, believes that Mr. Coleman had killed Kim before he had gotten home, and that he didn't stumble onto the body until he had actually made a couple treks back and forth. He had left the house, went to the 7-Eleven, got himself some snacks, came back, was on his way to the bathroom when he passed by the basement door and saw Miss Kim down at the bottom of the stairs.
Quick question.
Yep.
Who was Wilson's lawyer? Was it a public
Um,
defender or private?
Good
I
question.
don't know that. I never asked that question. I'm going to think that it was likely a public defender, especially yeah. If we're talking
Seems
about
like
a young kid. What's that?
from what I'm hearing, he may have been railroaded, but I mean that's on his lawyer as much as anything else. I would think.
No, because the evidence, the exculpatory evidence, like the alibi, was removed from the file. He didn't
Okay,
have access to it. His attorney didn't have
but the lawyer
access to
didn't
it.
have access to it. Okay, so that's part of the argument. Then. Okay.
Right. So it's now a he said she said. He could just be making up stories without these other pieces, and we're gonna show those items here in a couple seconds. Now, the medical examiner Parviz Packerman testifies rigor mortis or stiffness is developed of rigidity in the decedent's muscles, which starts usually after death. We expect to have full rigidity within the first 8 to 12 hours. Rigidity depends on a number of factors. One would be the state of health of the decedent prior to death, the weight, whether he or she was thin or obese, the exposure to ambient temperature. The heat would actually expedite the process, where the cold would actually delay the development and its disappearance. Miss Kim's body was in a cool basement, so we can anticipate that there's going to be a longer time to go through this. But still, if she is in full rigidity at 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m., then even at those cooler temperatures, that only backs it up to probably about the time that Mr. Wilson believes Mr. Coleman actually killed her, which would have been at around 3 a.m.
Was Mr. Coleman, ever considered a suspect? And did you ever read why or how he was cleared?
He wasn't cleared. So basically, the only thing that it states in the actual trial transcripts is that the DA stipulates to the fact that nobody can find him, and that's because he's left the country.
The police report.
Well, I do have some pieces in here from the police report, like the evidence logs, which become very, very convoluted as well. I am actually on slide 6 right now of my presentation, and this is some of the evidence that was taken from the backpack. Basically, what we have here is a note of an illegal search and seizure. So basically, he claims that Michael Yore, the arresting officer, had searched his backpack, even though he did not give permission for that. To the right here, we actually see when the search warrant was actually requested was not until April 1st. So the fact that we have markings up here saying taken from backpack 31st of March 1996, wouldn't that allude to the fact that they searched him illegally?
If he didn't consent,
Wow.
And he didn't consent. In the police reports, it says he strictly did not consent for them to go into his backpack. So basically, this
did they
little
find anything probative in the backpack?
yes, and that's the exculpatory evidence. That's his alibi, basically. So we have a receipt up here on 3/30/96 at 11:33 p.m. for a ticket from San Francisco one way to Palo Alto. Below that, we have an actual note that Mr. Wilson wrote out when he was at Rogers Restaurant. And it says, I found a woman's purse in Rogers Restaurant Saturday, 13/30, 3/30, 1996. I found a woman's purse in Rogers Restaurant and gave it to the busboy, who ran out with the purse. But it's hard to read his writing. He's got a very, very...
Few minutes later,
Oh,
he
yes.
returned with purse and gave it to his
Yes.
wife's restaurant behind the counter. I also told them my phone number if they will have a question to call me. So
Correct.
that would mean he would have witnesses to corroborate that, right?
Well,
Or no?
and they did. Private investigators and the district attorney's office sent out investigators to discuss with the actual owner. Now, there were some key points here. The owner absolutely 100% remembers this day. Number one, because it was their last day in business. They shut their doors the following day. So they know. Now, she couldn't say the precise time that Mr. Wilson was in her shop, but she did state that this purse incident absolutely happened. So she is corroborating, but she cannot give him a time frame, which allowed the DA to kind of play around that and state that it could have been earlier that he was there, and he'd still have had time to actually commit this crime. So this particular piece was removed from his backpack as well. It was copied, it was put into the file, and then subsequently removed. Did not show up at trial. Again, though, seized on the 31st of March when their search warrant isn't even good until April 1st. So right there, we have them playing with this individual's rights.
Was there any evidence that was recovered from him that was used against him
No,
in that
no.
search?
No, not in the search, but in the blood evidence, they found his blood at the crime scene. So, as if to say he had injured himself in some way. And that's when the story gets even a little bit more interesting, because he picks up this ride with this particular taxi cab driver who's already had a heck of a day. So, once he leaves this Rogers restaurant at 1:30 is basically his time frame, he states. He walks a couple blocks and he stops at a payphone. He calls the yellow cab company to meet him at his place and pick him up. So there are phone calls made in this procession which also link up, and the yellow cab is also capable of saying, yes, we did receive these calls from Mr. Wilson. And it was from a payphone, because if it had come from a home residence, then we would have been able to clock the phone number, because he is a continuing client and his phone number would have came up and they would have known exactly where to go. When he made the phone call to the yellow cab company, the dispatcher actually gave the wrong address. So the taxi cab had gone to the wrong location. And by the time Mr. Wilson had made it home at approximately 1:58 in the afternoon, he returned another call saying, hey, where's the taxi cab? The dispatcher let him know that they accidentally dispatched to the wrong address. They would get him over there immediately. So at approximately 2:04 p.m., the cab driver shows up, picks him up. At this point in time, he has no idea where Kim is. He's stating that strange car is in the driveway, her car is gone, and that he hasn't seen her pretty much at all that day. The taxi cab driver gets him to San Francisco, gets lost, can't find the location he's supposed to be going to because he's not familiar with San Francisco. And so Mr. Wilson tells him, just take me to the Caltrans station. I'll have my friends meet me there. When he gets him to the Caltrans station, as he's getting out of the vehicle, I'm guessing that the cab driver was a little frustrated, but he accidentally slams Mr. Wilson's hand into the car door, which then breaks some fingers, rips off a fingernail. He's bleeding profusely. Now he's got to get himself to the hospital. He spends the rest of the night in the hospital. He has all of this as evidence. He's not even around. And he's also freshly bandaged. So there is notations in the police report. The investigating officer that was looking over Mr. Wilson, notating whether or not he had any abrasions or scratches, he had none physically. And of course, he indicated that there would be blood underneath his fingernails because he just recently had this accident for which he has evidence for and he was in the hospital for.
He had the medical documents to prove it?
Yes. But this is why the DA was forced to back up the murder time frame from 12:48 to 1:58 p.m. because he had viable alibi for everything thereafter if they simply remove the fact that he was at that restaurant and walked home during the time frame in which they claimed she was murdered.
Wow, so they just played around with the time frame.
Was the cab driver called as a witness?
Yes.
And he verified his story about how he got hurt?
Yep, all of it.
And that injury occurred during the murder, or something like that.
I didn't really get into that so much, but what I did take note to is that the investigating officer did make note that Mr. Wilson's hand had a fresh bandage on it. And I would have thought that if he had this fresh bandage, so he got this bandage done between the hours of, let's say, 3:00 in the afternoon and midnight while he's at the hospital before he comes home. If he had then touched her, he would have had blood on this bandage, which would have meant that he'd only come in contact with her after the bandaging of his hand. I mean, I can't even wrap my mind around how they were able to get him convicted.
I don't understand why they're so gung-ho after him and ignoring the other guy.
Because the other guy absconded. Now they don't have a suspect at all. Might as well
truth and justice. You got to keep an open mind that it might have been the other guy, and flight is a circumstantial evidence as to guilt.
Right. Well, and here's the thing: when they removed these items from his backpack on the 31st, copied it and put it into his file as if they were actively investigating him as the culprit, Mr. Coleman hadn't absconded yet. When the blood was removed from the actual evidence locker, Mr. Coleman hadn't absconded yet. So it looked to me like they were looking to railroad him from the very beginning.
Okay, how soon did they arrest Wilson after the murder?
That morning.
Wow.
Oh, the Sunday morning?
Yes, Sunday morning on the 31st, they took him in. They
And
had his
Jordan was still
backpack.
around, but they didn't arrest him.
No, no, they just
So they were
arrested.
already assuming it was Wilson.
Right.
Was it because Coleman is the one who actually called the police?
It may very well have been, and he was instructed to do so or prodded to do so by my client because he was resistant to do so. He wouldn't even go down and help him assess her. He literally was doing everything he could to stay clear of it, but did evidently end up actually calling the police department. And sometimes, I mean, we see in law, tell me if I'm wrong, Nolan, he who files first sometimes wins, right?
Right. Yeah, it happens a lot in domestic violence too.
Right.
With but it was the house phone that was used for the call.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So another report from evidence that collected on 4/1 of 1996 showed that Officer Cale Gibson states that they assisted Detective Yor in the execution of the search warrant executed on 4/1/96. In her report, or his report, dated 4/1/96 at 3:30 to 4 p.m. is when they claim they executed this search, but we saw the handwriting that says taken from the backpack on 3/31. So now we've got an officer who's kind of playing the game. You know, we didn't do this search until 4/1. It became mandatory, I think, that they remove that stuff from the actual police file simply because it would literally have it wouldn't have been admissible, right? I mean, now that they're in trouble for doing something that they shouldn't have done, so it makes me think that that illegal search and seizure preempted the final acts of framing Mr. Wilson for this.
That's terrible. Just because you have bad police work is no reason to send an innocent man to prison for murder.
We know that. Definitely. So in this, they stated that they took out U.S. currency, small changes, keychain and keys, wallet, credit cards, Stanford University ID cards, health cards, telephone calling cards, suspect's phone book and address book, computer disk, miscellaneous papers, letters, and receipts, and a blue binder containing miscellaneous papers, receipts, and bills. So these are basically what they're stating at this particular point in time, and that was on slide 7.
None of that incriminated him, right? It was more exculpatory than incriminating, right?
And that's why it goes missing.
That's just bad police work.
Exactly. And then on slide 8, basically, I showed another police report. This is from the investigating officer that's actively doing the search of Mr. Wilson at the time, at the house, basically before he is arrested. I just wanted to point out a couple things that they talked about in here because I found them to be very interesting. Officer G. Brooks put, I took 2 Polaroid Spectra head photos, which I gave to Detective Yor. And Detective Yor is our officer in question for the framing act. He says, I then photographed Wilson with a Pentax PZ70 35mm camera using a Pentax flash accessory. I took full body photos, then took close-ups of his hands. I decided not to attempt to remove the bandages and splint from his right little finger, as it appeared to have been professionally bandaged. I decided to wait until our work at the police station was done. Then take Wilson to the Stanford Hospital emergency room so staff there could remove the bandage and rewrap the finger. The first roll of film, the full torso and hands, was labeled and placed in evidence. Next, I attempted to get scraping from under Wilson's fingernails. The nails had already been trimmed down to the skin. It was difficult to obtain samples due to the shortness of the nails. However, some small samples were recovered and placed in individually marked envelopes. These were later placed in evidence. As I was taking the samples, Wilson mentioned there would be blood there on his hands and nails, and he had tried to help the victim after he had found her. He also told me he had washed his hands after he had attempted to help. Either way, there would have been evidence if there was on this bandage. Did they take this? I mean, if this bandage now contains her blood and he can prove he's been gone for the last 9 hours getting it wrapped at a hospital, they would state that he was not the one that was there killing her. He says, next I use a gunshot residue collection kit. I'm not sure why she wasn't shot with a gun. Right?
That's weird.
It says, I visually inspected Wilson's body for scars, tattoos, or any signs of trauma, scratches, bruises, etc. I did not see any. So here he is ultimately in basically full-on combat with a feisty Asian woman. Because let me tell you, some of the recollections from her neighbors and so forth indicate she's a very spunky, get in your face, climbing on the side of vehicles, screaming at people as they're trying to pull away from her yard. Like she's going to give you a fight. But he has absolutely nothing, no signs except for this wrapped hand. Let's see. I did not see.
Question: what about
Yes.
the background of this other guy that fled? Was he a Stanford student as well?
I have no information on him. I'm sure I could ask my client. He probably would have some more information on who. Yeah, right. But sometimes in these positions, these people roommates don't really spend too much time together. If they're not friends, they're not hanging out. They're not they're not really knowing too much about each other. Maybe just the basics, like where he worked or what he does for a living, if he was a student. But I'm not going to suggest that he absolutely is going to know this person, hands down.
What are the races?
Wilson and Coleman kind of scream Caucasian.
Both of them?
Well, Coleman is a stereotypical white name.
So we don't know. It's not listed on the police report?
Your client is Peter Wilson, right?
Right.
Yes.
You seem to know, not to get off topic, but you seem to know, maybe it's because your time being involved with handwriting analysis and probably different court cases as well, but you seem to have taken on full investigation on this and done your homework on all of the stuff that's happening, the police reports and the vials and everything, the missing vial, and if something ever happens to me, can you jump on the case, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I really do appreciate the way he went about it. Just like when I worked the Zodiac case, Dennis Kaufman came to me and he said he wanted me to look at handwriting, but he also wanted me to view his website and see the other, pictorial evidence and things that he had against Jack Terrence. And I told him until I completed my examination, I did not want to see any of that. I did not visit his website or his message board to determine what other evidence he had. I needed to do this in an unbiased manner. And I appreciate Mr. Wilson.
Your take, yeah. Professional.
Yes. And I appreciate that Mr. Wilson, when he engaged my services, did not lay any of this other stuff on me. So he basically asked me to do the handwriting. And then after the handwriting, I received a package from him that included the independent lab that looked at the DNA, that information. And so he kind of piecemealed it out to me after that. And I got little bits. And the more I got interested and the more I wrote back, the more he would send. And I basically have and he has to handwrite all of this. Literally, he's handwriting it from transcripts, from court proceedings, from, what had occurred. But I probably have a good couple hundred pages that he has handwritten from prison to me. And when I have a question like, okay, so, was your hand injured? What was he talking about? Then I'd have to wait, that 2 weeks for a letter to come back. So it's been a very lengthy process over about 2 years. But I do believe that I have finally gotten, down to the bottom of everything that he contends occurred. And to me, it definitely looks like we have an innocent man that has been in prison for 30 years. If I continue on with this particular one,
the new evidence.
We're getting to that. So
Okay,
basically, I'm just kind of going over the police reports and what occurred at the time of them actually showing up to the residence. He says he didn't see.
Where is he incarcerated?
At Palo Alto Police Department, I'm guessing at this point, at a Palo Alto jail.
At that time, but I know, what prison is he in right now?
Now he's in an actual medical facility in the Stockton area. They had to transfer him out of prison because he is failing on health. I believe that he's probably got some mental health issues going on, and he's not able to eat when he was in the establishment. So they have sent him out to a medical facility where he actually is doing much better right now. I'm very happy that they were at least able to help him out with that.
Okay.
Let's see. I requested, okay, so he didn't see any scars, bruises, or abrasions. Once Wilson had removed his clothes, I requested he comb his pubic region over a clean towel. Again, why did you do this if you didn't think she was raped? If you weren't going to run, they did a literal rape kit on this guy. They found motile sperm on her, and they didn't do any testing on it forensically. I got the comb and towel from a sexual assault evidence collection kit. Wilson did as instructed, and also at my request plucked approximately 25 hairs from his pubic region. These were placed in an envelope I provided. I also plucked head hair from 5 areas around his skull. A saliva sample was taken using a collection device provided in the sexual assault kit. These items were labeled and placed in evidence. Wilson was given 2 sets of disposable jumpsuits, which he put on. Officer Souza then began rolling Wilson's palm and fingerprints. So they automatically just went straight at him.
Were they doing the same thing to the other guy?
I have no idea. Again, that's a question I will have to ask Mr. Wilson. It says, shortly before noon, technologist Mill Smith, ID number 106, arrived at noon, drew 2 vials of blood. So this is the only place you see 2 vials. From here on out, all testimony and transcripts are going to indicate that only 1 vial of blood was taken. For the typing, so he says 1 for typing and 1 to test for alcohol and or other substances. I received the samples and placed them in the evidence refrigerator. So these went straight into the refrigerator and should never have come out until they went to the lab.
Was one of the vials ever tested for his blood? When they used one of them, say they tested it for alcohol or substance abuse, did they say that none was found and that they basically used the entire vial for that? Is that what they're trying to say?
Well, that I'm not really sure of, but what I do know is that we have testimony from the individual who took all of the forensic evidence to the lab to be tested, and that officer stated that only 1 vial of blood existed. So when they came in to do their job, which was to get and collect the forensic evidence and take it to the lab, there was only 1 vial. So now we're caught between, this guy says he took 2 at the residence where the murder occurred. Let me see. Wilson again refused. Oh, and here we do have in this particular report, so at this point in time, Mr. Wilson again refused to give permission to enter the backpack and asked if he could use other sources such as the phone book. So he was basically looking to make his phone call, but all his phone numbers were in his phone book. They wouldn't even give that to him because he wouldn't allow them to search his backpack. And this is on the 31st. Now, of course, this is where we get into on slide 9. We can actually see the entry. This was one of my jobs at hand, which is this statement here that says removed 1 vial, 31st of March, 96, and pertains to the case number. He asked me to compare this particular handwriting to Michael Yor, the arresting officer's handwriting, which we'll get to that handwriting examination here in a second. But this is L. Dillard. This particular notation says that package 1 brown bag containing gray briefs collected from Wilson on 3/31/96, item number 7 on the property sheet by D. Souza, and package number 2 envelope containing blood sample, just 1. So no indication that there is double. And then she later testifies in trial that she only had 1 that she took to the lab. Property evidence report shows 1 vial in inventory, yet 1 vial removed by Detective Michael Yor on 3/31. So these are 2 different dates. L. Dillard actually did this particular report on 4/1/96. So that's when she took the physical evidence that was taken from the crime scene to the lab. So we do have 2 different dates here. And I didn't have L. Dillard's handwriting to match to this particular notation, but the good thing is that it matched Mr. Yor so well, we didn't need anybody else. So next slide, on slide number 10, basically gives us the map of what it looks like from where Mr. Wilson actually was at Rogers Restaurant, basically on the corner of University Avenue. And let's see, so at 1:05 p.m., this is Mr. Wilson's accounts of that particular day. At 1:05 p.m., he arrives at Rogers Restaurant. He eats. At 1:30 p.m. approximately is when he finds the woman's purse. He makes the note. He leaves the restaurant at approximately 1:35. At about 1:40, he calls the yellow cab company from a payphone on University Avenue, and I've kind of mapped that out with this second X up here, just down the way from Rogers Restaurant. Let's see. He's asking to be picked up at his residence by 2 p.m. At 1:58 p.m., he calls Yellow Cab again, this time from home, to find out that the address was dispatched incorrectly. At 2:02 p.m., Yellow Cab arrives, starts the meter, and drives until 3:46 p.m., and he ends up at the Caltrans station, where he ends up with his hand slammed in the door at approximately 3:50. At 4:40 p.m., he's admitted to UCSF Medical Center in San Francisco, and at 10 p.m., he's discharged from the hospital. 11:33 p.m., we see he purchases the ticket from Caltrans to return to Palo Alto. He says he arrived at the station at approximately 12:10 a.m., and he arrives at home at 1:10 a.m. because the ticket is for 12:10 a.m. He doesn't arrive home or to the station until 1:10 a.m. At 2:50 a.m., he actually arrives home, and then at 3:45 a.m., he heads to the bathroom and finds Kim, and he tells Coleman to call, and at 3:53, so it took 8 minutes for Mr. Coleman to actually pick that phone up and make that phone call.
Damn.
Yeah, 8 minutes. 8 minutes he's trying to coax this guy into calling the police. Testimony that we had on behalf of Mr. Wilson was the owners of the restaurant, as we discussed, owners, the dispatcher of the Yellow Cab Company, and the actual cab driver all testified on his behalf as to what he was saying was true. Mr. Bertram Glass is actually the cab driver, and he actually filed an incident report of the hand being slammed in the door. So we know that that did not happen at the house in, the heat of the moment type thing. Medical personnel testified to his hand and the time in the hospital. Ms. Kim's family testified that Mr. Wilson's defense that Ms. Kim had not dated anyone during that time frame and was not sexually active to their knowledge. The fact that the leaf from the basement floor was stuck to Miss Kim's buttocks under her underwear and pants. So now we've got even more pieces of clothing that's been pulled down in order for that leaf to actually get there. Rigor mortis, max 36 hours. Kim's was done by 9:30 a.m. on 4/1/1996, which means she was killed after 9 p.m. on Saturday evening. And Mr. Wilson he wasn't home. He was simply at the hospital. Subsequent testimony of medical experts shows that only 10 to 30% of rape victims have visible injury that can be seen by the naked eye under bright light, contrary to the DA's medical examiner's testimony. And subsequent testimony of medical experts shows that intact sperm is only motile within 12 hours of being deposited. Again, that is also based on, heat or cold. And we know that when her body was taken from the house at 8:30 p.m. on Sunday evening, she was placed in a refrigerator. That would have helped things to last a little bit longer. Let's see. And then for the next 12 hours, the tails begin to separate, rendering them no longer motile within 24 hours. So again, this does not take us all the way back to 12:58, 12:48 p.m. between that 12 and 1 o'clock hour that they're claiming the murder occurred. This is another piece of evidence that Mr. Wilson asked me to examine, which was a property log. And there are actually 3 property logs that he provided to me. And as you go through them, you can see for yourself the differences in the actual handwriting and the entries. Things are being scratched out, they're being obliterated, they're being whited out. And the final actual property report, which is on slide number 14, is where it contains the officer's handwriting stating removed 1 vial, and he removed it on March 31st, 1996. Why? If you took this to the lab, why would it not go with the other vial? Why would it not go with the other evidence? And I would think that this would be something you would strictly keep separate, the arresting officer versus forensic evidence collected going to a lab, so that the chain of custody is not necessarily confused, but compromised. If the arresting officer has, some grit in this for needing to get out from under the things he's done, such as an illegal search and seizure, or he's just trying to set the community's mind at ease that they've caught the killer, when in fact he's actually doing something that's nefarious, and it has cost this man 30 years of his life.
Wow.
And that blows my mind. The property reports should not look like this. These property reports should not vary. They should not be different. They should not be having different entries, right, Nolan? You should have 1 log.
I don't see why the cops are so gung-ho on the one guy and so lax on the other guy.
Right. Well, because the
So
other
that's
guy's
the
the one that
question I was
called
getting
the
at earlier.
police.
Well, yeah. Do we have a recording of the phone call, the
I
911
have
call?
no, I have no idea. I have
Yeah,
no idea.
because I'm curious as to what he told the police.
No shit.
Did he implicate his roommate and try
Right.
to
I don't
exonerate
believe he
himself?
did. I believe the statement. I think
And
I
why
do
did
have those answers in the documents, and I want to say that Mr. Wilson had indicated that he had just told the police that Mr. Wilson found her.
Okay.
Not necessarily that he implicated it, but my roommate found her dead in the basement, kind of thing. I would have to go back to look to see what was exactly
And that is the
what
truth.
was said.
He did find her. But next question, why didn't Wilson call himself?
Because he was assessing her.
Okay, so he was down there, hey, call the cops. I found her dead. Okay.
Yeah. and like I
I'm
said,
curious to hear or to find out if it's out there what was actually said during the call.
right.
They should have recorded it. All 911 calls are recorded. So his lawyer at some point should have requested that recording way back when.
And it took Mr. Coleman 8 minutes to call the police. He was hawing around.
Okay.
What's that?
So when your client said, call the cops, she's dead, blah, 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 he waited 8 minutes instead of just doing it immediately, is what you're saying?
Yes, he was basically, based on my recollection of what Mr. Wilson said in his paperwork, was that Mr. Coleman was basically bucking back from wanting to make that call. And it took him literally 8 minutes from the time her body was discovered to actively make that 911 call.
Well, that's kind of weird, too. Did he share that with the cops? He says, hey, I asked him to call that. He waited for, why wait?
I don't know if at that moment in time when he was going through what he was going through that he had the wherewithal to slow down and think about Mr. Coleman's actions. Don't know that if he really believed he was the murderer at that moment in time. So he may not have, remembered to state these particular things to the police.
Right, but I'm just saying he obviously was sure he didn't do it.
Yes.
But he didn't. I don't know. I would immediately suspect the other guy.
Well, we would. Come on. If we know we're innocent, I'm going to go in with somebody. But would you blame somebody else that you particularly knew?
I'm
You
not
know,
gonna
and
blame him, but I'm
this.
just,
If Coleman's saying,
why did you not immediately call the cops when I asked you to?
right, and if Coleman was making out like, oh, I just got home too, you know what I'm saying? Like, he may very well have believed his roommate that his roommate wasn't a part of it either. He just didn't see himself being hemmed up for something he didn't do himself.
The report evidence that you've been reading doesn't say hardly anything about Coleman.
No.
Well, any
they
statements, any interviews, any evidentiary moves taken, investigative moves, it just neglects it, basically, right?
And maybe Coleman was bad mouthing Mr. Wilson, right?
Yeah, I would say had to have said something.
Right.
Try to throw him under the bus.
Point the direction towards him to where when they came to investigate, they were already suspecting him.
Right. And if Mr. Wilson wasn't suspecting Mr. Coleman, he would have no reason to badmouth him or to point the finger that direction.
He didn't know. He didn't know anyway, either. He didn't know what happened, right?
Right.
Are there transcripts of the entire trial?
I believe Mr. Wilson is in possession of them. I do have many. I don't think I have everything by any means, but I do believe that he is in possession after 30 years of all of the trial transcripts.
Makes me wonder as far as like Mr. Wilson, right? Because he was obviously convicted by 12 jurors, right?
Who were force-fed what the DA wanted them to be force-fed. Yes.
And the police, the DA and the police. But at some point, someone's got to have justice. I mean, you're not there just to convict. You're there as an officer of the court to promote justice.
I was watching a documentary regarding Karen Reed and the officer that was killed with her boyfriend. And the entire time I'm watching the
Jeremy,
documentary, yeah, and I
the
can't
Sacramento
help
officer. Yeah.
right. I can't help but think how can she be convicted in this case? How could Mr. Wilson be convicted when, for instance, in the Karen Reed case, the other female officer was looking stuff up on Google and then deleting it. In this case, there's another gentleman that could possibly have done it. So how could the jury say guilty? Aren't
Beyond
you?
reasonable doubt. Yeah.
Yeah, isn't if there's reasonable doubt, aren't you supposed to say not guilty?
If we could forget the fact that the police officer planted his blood at the crime scene. So this is what I believe that they hung their hat on, was the presence of his blood on Miss Kim at the actual scene of the crime. And that's
Well,
where we get into this.
had a
On slide number 14, we see the removal of one vial on the 31st of March, 1996. This may also be why they hesitated and waited to call out the coroner, and that the forensics was still busy in the middle of doing whatever they were doing and wouldn't allow the coroner to go downstairs and address the body.
He has a duty to get there and do his thing as soon as possible.
Correct.
Who found the blood on the woman? Was it done at the
Supposedly,
lab?
no, the forensic team at the scene of the crime purportedly found the blood. I have a couple more. I wanted to show, just before we get into the handwriting, a couple more pieces of exculpatory evidence on slide number 15, which is, again, the receipt at the top says taken from the backpack. So I was also asked to look at this handwriting at the top here. That belongs to, I discovered that it belongs to Officer Michael Yore. So he did, in fact, take this receipt from the backpack before he was granted the right to search.
Wow.
And then we see to the right of that, we see this paper that says non-transferable, subject to tariff regulations. And it says, I removed. Now, if I could tell you who this person was, we'd figure out who actually tampered with this particular file. But this document with this receipt was never provided to the defense team, and it subsequently went missing after it had been removed from the backpack. It had been copied, placed into the file as page number 120. Wait, let's see. This is page 126. And then to the right, which is now page 127, says, I removed, and I've blown that up with the signature of the individual who claims to have removed it, but it says, I removed page 126. So now all that's in the file is this one that says non-transferable, subject to tariff regulations. Do you know what that means, Nolan?
No.
Either way, the exculpatory evidence was no longer in the police file.
Police report. Tariff.
What's that?
What do tariff regulations have to do with items in a police report or evidence?
I have no idea. So, but basically in 2007, Peter Wilson requested a copy of the police report from Palo Alto PD of page 126 because he saw that it was missing in the original documentation that he was given. He questioned his own defense attorney, who also said it was missing from his file. He never had a copy of it either. So Mr. Wilson requested this specific page and was given both of these two pages, the one that actually has the receipt that was not available at trial to the one that states, I removed this particular page from the actual file. Now, same thing with the actual note. Here again, we have a photocopied version of the note that was found in his backpack that pertains to the actual alibi of him being at the restaurant and finding this woman's purse that everybody there, the busboy and the owner of the restaurant, confirmed, yes, this whole thing happened. And it says taken from the backpack, 31st of March, 96, 091. 010, which is the case number. But again, to the right, this is another document. So page 9 was also missing. Now we have this page 9A that's shown up. And it again says, I removed page 9.
Wow.
And the only thing that was in the file was 9A. So he asks for a copy of this. And he actually did this, I believe. He says 5/10 of 2019 requests more documents from police file and receives this particular document on 3/25 of 2020. Another document that was taken from the backpack before the warrant was issued was removed from the file and the availability of the defense.
So he's actually filed a habeas, right?
Correct.
When did he file it? I think you only have a year from the discovery of the new evidence.
Well, he filed it pretty much immediately after getting the results back from the DNA lab and from me. And so he's just sitting in the rotation at this point.
So
Here's where I actually did the handwriting of Mr. Yor. Where are you at? You're on 18. I'm on slide 17 for your viewers. Okay. But basically, I was able to actually map out all of the different characteristics of handwriting, the way he actually does the connection of the crossbar from the letter F straight into the R, the form and shape of the O's and the M's, the starting and stopping points, the actual, the way he forms the letter K's. Everything that I could find in Michael Yor's handwriting was a consistent match, including the numbering system to Officer Yor, Michael Yor. So he is the one that had taken both the alibi note from Roger's restaurant, the receipt. Mr. Wilson also claims that he also took the $400 in cash that was in his backpack. That came up missing. That was never returned or given back to him. So there were several things that were taken from the backpack that he claims Mr. Yor had taken for himself. On slide number 18, once again, I'm comparing to the actual removal of the one vial and, again, the receipt itself, where it says taken from the backpack. I found that all of the handwriting characteristics were all consistent with each other. So again, I made an identification that he is the one that removed a vial, at least on March 31st of 1996, a day before all the forensic evidence actually went to the lab.
Damn.
And then that brings us into slide number 19, which is really kind of the home run hit here, and that is the independent forensics DNA testing and technologies. DNA lab states that the degradation levels of Mr. Wilson's DNA is similar to identical from the crime scene and the reference sample that was taken by Palo Alto PD. And what that really means in layman's terms is that if blood is at a crime scene, open to the air, to different type of inclement weathers, we are going to see a type of degradation that occurs and takes place as this blood dries. The degradation scale on the DNA that was found at the crime scene was identical to the degradation level that was found absolutely in the vial of blood that was taken from Mr. Wilson's arm. And so that means that literally, I'm thinking here again, Mr. Yor is down there splashing this blood around while not allowing this coroner to come down. And then once the coroner comes down, they're immediately collecting it right after throwing it down. And that's how the degradation is so similar between what was in the vial and what was taken from Mr. Wilson.
Wow.
What would prompt them to do shit like that, though?
Secure conviction. Secure conviction.
You are talking to the right person here. I mean,
David, job is to collect evidence and do a report.
It is. But I don't think you understand what David does. David, tell Nolan, because I've not really discussed what it is that you do.
I do police accountability. I record police. I ask questions. I try to find patterns in what they do and how they police. 6 different police chiefs have resigned after being exposed on my channels. And
awesome.
We're working on the 7th one right now. This one police chief in Arvin, California was fired from a different department for stealing money. He was charged and convicted. I guess the Attorney General believes it's okay to allow these cops to do a probationary period, become reserve officers for a long period of time until they can get allowed to, get their licenses or be cops again. And we have one cop in Arvin nearby who not only did that, get fired, arrested, charged, goes to Maricopa, California, and harasses people, targeting Hispanic people, and that entire department, because of the scandal that happened out there, that entire department was disbanded, and he was out looking for a job somewhere else, gets hired in Arvin, becomes a chief of police using a different name, and now we're exposing him, trying to get him out of there. And this is what we see. The type of protection, umbrellas of protection that cops have, and it's unbelievable how bad cops are allowed to do stuff like this. And it seems like it probably isn't the first time Yor has ever done anything like this. And I would like to find out more about him. See if we can find out where he went, where he was policing, see if we can get any kind of records, even though I know they are destroyed so that the people cannot find anything about these cops.
Right.
It's funny that you mentioned Arvin because I was born in Bakersfield, and
That that
a lot of my family went to high school in Arvin, and I
wow.
got a lot of connections down there.
I live in Bakersfield now, but I'm close by
Okay,
to Arvin. Yeah.
interesting. Yeah, my best buddy is used to be the editor of the California newspaper, Bob Price. Now he
Nice.
does TV feature stories,
Yeah.
and he's
I know
real
who he
good.
is. Yeah, I know who
You
he
know,
is.
you
Very
know he
cool.
is. He's a local celebrity.
Yeah, he is. Yeah.
Well, I think other than that, all that I really had left was kind of Mr. Wilson's evidence for the writ of habeas corpus, but I feel like we probably have covered a majority of that throughout the presentation. It definitely takes into consideration everything we've discussed, the forensic testimony, what we do know about forensics testified to by other great pathologists and coroners around, the United States. Also, the fact that the DNA degradation is similar to identical to what was taken from his arm, and that should never happen in a case like this. So
Well,
I'm here to hopefully expose this entire system and hopefully get people to pay attention, so that he does get this right for a rehearing, because this man does, I believe, in my honest opinion, I believe he does not belong in prison for this murder.
Sounds like he doesn't, and it sounds like a terrible police work.
Yeah.
it does. Well, thank you, Nanette, and also Nolan. Thank you guys for coming on and sharing this. I hope we can get enough eyes on this and put enough pressure on them to, allow him to have a new trial. And it sucks to hear that he's ill, and hopefully he gets to see the light of day again.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, and even then, I think that coming out of that, his mental health is going to take many, many years to get over what he has probably witnessed and gone through in prison.
Like being a prisoner of war, you're fucking
Yeah,
prison.
and I thank you, David, for having us again on your show, because I appreciate anybody who can help us get this out there.
Very
Thank you
welcome.
so much, and thank you, Nolan.
Thank
All
you
right.
both.
Well, we'll definitely circle back around this. We'll find out updates and we'll try to present updates as well. And anybody else that's watching this, please share this story and let's get some eyes on this. Let's get this man, if he's innocent, let's get him free. And we're not supposed to allow cops to do bad stuff like this. And this is why it's important that we continue the work that we do. We don't have subscribers, we have supporters. So thank you guys.
Right.
And let's get some eyes on this.
One last comment is I have a criminal matter felony in Bakersfield next month. So maybe when I'm down there, we can maybe have some lunch or hook up or
Yeah.
have a beer or something.
No doubt. Get my number. Get my number from Nanette.
Okay.
And I will
Alright,
keep
so-
everybody updated as I get more information on the case.
And everybody, I'm gonna drop Nanette's link in the description and the pinned comment. Make sure you guys go show her some support.
I'm going to mention
Thank
you to
you.
Bob, too, because maybe Bob could do a feature story on what you do.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt.
Absolutely.
Thank
Yeah.
you guys.
All right, you guys. Everyone
All right,
take care.
cool.
Have a great
Alrighty.
weekend. Happy
You too.
Easter.
Happy
You too.
Easter.
Happy Easter, Nanette. Hope to see you soon.
All right, guys.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye-bye.